In Canada, you have a lot of local housing regulations that create red tape and just generally get in the way of speedy development of new housing units that we so desperately need during a housing crisis.
So what the HAF does, it encourages municipalities to change their processes.
Many of these larger cities moved very quickly to implement zoning reforms, and we're starting to see the results in those communities.
This is all hands on deck, so we can increase housing supply and get affordability for Canadians across the board.
You're listening to In-House, Canada's housing podcast, where we share the latest on Canada's housing market.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to In-House. I'm your host, Mireille Thériault. Today, we're talking about the Housing Accelerator Fund, or HAF. To help us understand the ins and outs of HAF, I'm joined by Aled Iorwerth, one of CMHC's Deputy Chief Economists, and Chris Woodcock, Director, Government Relations and Head of the Housing Accelerator Fund. Welcome, Aled and Chris. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mireille.
Let's kick things off with you, Chris. Can you tell us exactly what is the Housing Accelerator Fund and how does it work?
Absolutely, Mireille. Across Canada, housing is governed by a complex web of regulations, bylaws, and roles of different governments, including local governments. And it's not a surprise to many listeners that in Canada, you have a lot of local housing regulations that create red tape, slow approval processes, and just generally get in the way of speedy development of new housing units that we so desperately need during a housing crisis. The idea behind the Housing Accelerator Fund is the federal government is investing $4.4 billion to incentivize local governments to get rid of that red tape, to speed up their local approval processes and introduce innovative new measures that can speed up housing across the country.
And how does it work?
Starting in 2023, CMHC began accepting applications from ambitious local governments that wanted to reform their housing approvals and wanted to participate in this program. Following some negotiations and assessments, we have landed 241 agreements with local governments, and that includes municipalities of all sizes, northern governments, Indigenous governments, and in fact, 2 agreements with the province of Quebec across 2 rounds of funding. A really important part of those agreements is that we also include additional permitted unit targets. And so the idea behind the program is we know we have an expectation based on Aled's work and based on local community and historical permitting trends. We know how fast communities were expected to grow. And HAF is premised on the idea that we're going to get additional permits beyond what would have happened anyways. So every community has a 4-year housing growth target, tracking how much they're speeding up that growth over the long term. And annual payments are based on completing the reforms and achieving ultimately the 4-year growth target.
Can you tell us a bit more about what you mean by reform?
Absolutely. HAF targets a few specific kinds of reforms. If you're interested in the full list, we have best practices posted on the website. But to be more specific, in many cases, we're talking about streamlined zoning. So up until recently, across Canada, more than 70% of residential housing lots were reserved exclusively for single-family homes. We're seeing communities commit to rezoning proposals that allow for, in many, many cases, up to 4 units as of right. So without requiring someone looking to develop a 4-unit housing to go through a lengthy and expensive and time-consuming process for obtaining a zoning waiver or a rezoning proposal. We see a lot of communities eliminating parking minimums, especially in downtown areas and in areas surrounding major transit stations. We're seeing proposals supporting greater density around transit stations to take advantage of walkable communities and make sure that people can live close to where those rapid transit systems exist. And then a wide range of innovative proposals from communities, anything from offering incentives to help make sure that affordable housing gets built, combined with often municipally owned land databases, and in some cases, it's support for additional resources for the community themselves to speed up application processes. So there's a wide range, and if listeners or viewers are interested, they can look at the best practices online.
HAF is a very ambitious program that seeks to address housing need in numerous and diverse municipalities across Canada. That being said, there could be some misconceptions. When can people expect to see the results of the money invested in HAF?
That's a great question. Typically in CMHC housing programs, we receive applications to build a housing project, and you're talking shovels in the ground, you pour a foundation, and it's very clear when a project starts, and it's very clear when a housing unit is created and household is able to live in that home in the end. HAF is a little bit different because it's based on achieving long-term reforms. And so what we're paying for is those reforms, and that can often mean difficult political conversations at the local level and putting enough federal cash into the system to encourage and incentivize local councils and local governments to make decisions they wouldn't otherwise have made. That can take time. Once those reforms are passed, once bylaws are adjusted and complex local regulations change, the system has to respond. The market has to respond. Developers change their proposals. A developer who was thinking about building a certain type or doing something in particular with a piece of land might decide this is a great time to take advantage of new rules around missing middle and new rules that make it easier to build missing middle housing, for example, and redevelop their property. And what we're seeing is the reforms themselves are shortening the timelines to get those proposals into the system, but it still takes a little while for this to play out. So 4 years, and our program is 4 years. 4 years is a very, very short window to see through a full development cycle. We are starting to see, however, results in terms of permit cycles in cities that were first movers. Calgary, Edmonton, Halifax, London, Ontario. Many of these larger cities moved very quickly to implement zoning reforms, and we're starting to see the results in those communities. It'll be some time before we can really substantiate the long-term effects.
Alid, HAF came about to address the housing supply gap. Can you speak to its opportunities?
Sure. Well, as regular viewers of this podcast will know, we've been going on about housing supply and affordability challenges for Canadians for quite a while. Back in 2018, we released a report where the HAF was initially mentioned, highlighting how supply problems are prevalent in some of Canada's most unaffordable cities. So what the HAF does, it encourages municipalities to change their processes. We know there is local opposition to new development, to new housing supply, but the intent of the HAF is really to show that there are benefits from development as well, getting these approval processes streamlined, getting more housing built. And the opportunity there is to get more supply of everything. We need more rental supply, we need more home ownership supply. Obviously, we need more social and affordable housing as well, but we need everything. We need it across the board. This is all hands on deck. It's trying to get all of these parts moving in the same direction so we can increase housing supply and get affordability for Canadians across the board.
Every municipality has a different rule book when it comes to development. How much of a challenge has that proven to be?
Well, our research has consistently shown that regulations, red tape, approval delays, development fees, all of these are barriers to development. We've been arguing that for a while. Last year, we conducted a survey with Statistics Canada that gathered data on all of these regulations. And at the time, we actually showed there was a strong correlation between red tape and a loss of housing affordability. What we're now doing, and with more research, is that we're even strengthening that result and saying that these regulations, approval delays, are causing a loss of housing affordability. So it's a very robust result. There's a lot of problems with these delays that's caused, and they've been long-standing in Vancouver and Toronto, and we're hoping to reform that. But it's also highlighting challenges for the future. I think there's a lot of opportunities with manufactured homes, prefabrication, developing economies of scale in these new technologies. Now, unfortunately, it seems that all of the municipalities are following their own regulations with respect to prefab housing, which sort of negates the opportunity there of really getting scale economies. We need more standardization of regulations, more and faster approval. So all of this is driving towards more housing affordability for everyone in Canada.
So, Chris, how do people stay up to date on progress?
There's a couple of ways. First of all, we regularly update our progress page on CMHC's website under the Housing Accelerator Fund subpage. We've published, as of now, about 70 progress reports covering all of the major cities. And for us in Housing Accelerator Fund, a city or a large applicant is over 10,000 people. We've got the vast majority of large cities across the country participating in the program. And so we've published detailed hundreds of pages at this point of information information about housing targets that are associated, that are part of those agreements, about the specific initiatives that cities and the reforms that cities have committed to undertaking, as well as progress and how they're doing so far. Overall, most of the cities that are part of the program are moving ambitiously and aggressively in implementing these reforms. We have a small number where either local political objections or local political discussions continue. For us, it's really important that we get ahead of those discussions and we work with communities to help make sure that they stay on track, because ultimately we want to see these funds end up where they're supposed to end up. And these funds end up investing directly in housing in these communities in the specific projects. So it's really important that we can get those dollars out the door, and we can't do that if cities aren't on track. So progress in that regard, that's on our website. Another way is that cities themselves are required to publish their own reporting on how they're doing and to talk to their citizens about their progress. Calgary, I think, has done a really good job of this, Edmonton as well. A lot of BC communities are very, very far ahead, including the city of Vancouver. And so there's a lot of exciting information out there about the kinds of reforms that we're seeing.
That's great. If our listeners would like to see a breakdown of where HAF has supported housing by community, check the video's description for a link to our progress page. What can we expect to see in the coming year?
For the program, it's really more 2 years, I would say. So for the HAF program, we're mid-cycle. So communities have had, for the most part, 2 years now to lock in their plans, to complete their action plans, to work out some of the inevitable complications that come about when you develop an action plan, and in some cases in a few weeks to apply for the program because it rolled out very quickly. Communities have now really had a chance to get their heads around it. In the first year, we saw for a lot of small communities, it was really difficult to set aside the capacity to figure out how to implement some of these reforms. We're now into the real full-scale implementation phase. We're starting to see the earliest hints of results around impact on permitting. It's too soon to really go either way, but we've noted, for example, that in the first year, as a group, HAF communities grew faster than communities that weren't participating in the program. That could be due, and Ellen knows this, but due to a lot of different factors, economic and otherwise outside the program. But en gros, we are seeing that HAF communities are growing a little bit faster and approving more permits. And we're excited to see what that looks like down the road. We're also working on some other related initiatives, and one of those is the Housing Design Catalog. CMHC, working with Housing and Infrastructure Canada, has published about 50 standardized designs. The plans for those designs are upcoming very shortly. And what those designs really provide is an opportunity for communities, many of them HAF communities, to help support hands-on development of missing middle housing. If you've got a piece of land and you're interested in putting in a laneway home, or you're interested in redeveloping that property into a multiplex or a fourplex or a threeplex, there's some regionally specific designs that have been pretty far along in the development curve, that are very close to permit ready, that can be taken advantage of. And communities and HAF participating communities are looking at ways to standardize their processes to shorten the time that it takes for someone looking to build one of those units and get that actually to market. So we're excited about that, and there's a lot more to come on that front.
That sounds very exciting. Thanks so much, Aled and Chris, for breaking down the Housing Accelerator Fund for us and its impact across Canada. To our listeners, check the episode description if you want to learn more about HAF and explore our progress. Thank you for joining us in-house. See you next time.
Did you know we're not just on YouTube? You can now find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. Don't miss our next episodes for more real, data-driven discussions. If you're learning from and/or enjoying this podcast, please share this episode, follow us, or subscribe. Reach out. Let us know what you think. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.